Hello and welcome. You're watching NewsX. I'm Rishabh Gulati. Now, if you watch NewsX regularly, you probably sat in conversations that we have, trying to give you a different perspective in us understanding who we are. Because the eons of wisdom that is available right under our footsteps at our fingertips requires a retranslation and a re-understanding for people like me constantly looking to self-discover themselves and of course find a path to where the country is going. There is one individual who doesn't need any introductions to a learned audience, but he is one of the scholars of the day. He has a day job. He's chairman, incidentally, of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council. But he's an author, he's an intellectual, and more importantly, he is an Indian looking at India and marveling at it. I have the proud privilege of introducing none other than Shri Bibek Debroy ji. He's joined today by Hindol Sengupta. Hindol Sengupta, with I think 9 books now, including an iconic work on Sardar Patel, is one of the serial authors and also intellectual scholars of the day. And we are here to discuss a book called the Ashtavakra Gita. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a seminal work that Bibek Debroy, amongst all his various responsibilities, including penmanship on penmanship, and I'll qualify that a bit later, has found time to do this. And Bibek ji, I laud you for the effort that you've made. I'm sure it was an intellectual enterprise, but thank you for sharing it with all of us. I want to start with the obvious question, sir. You know, in busy lives and when discussing serious matters, as you go along, you realize that your passions and intellectuals sometimes intertwine, and the species of a translation perhaps would have been an educative exercise even for you. Why did you choose to translate not just this sections of the minor Gitas, but 25 others?
Well, sometimes I tend to think that I didn't consciously take the decision. Events unfolded such that I was meant to do these translations. So as you said, that I've been doing these translations for several years now. When I say translations from Sanskrit to English, unabridged translations, Mahabharata, Valmiki, Ramayana, Harivansha, and now the Puranas. In the process, I did the Bhagavad Gita. Everyone knows the Bhagavad Gita. What people do not sometimes realize is that there are many other Gitas also. There are about 200 Gitas altogether. There are about 25 of them in the Mahabharata. There are several floating around in the Puranas, and there are many standalone ones. I did one of translating the ones that are in the Mahabharata. Amongst the standalone ones, the most important one, almost certainly, is the Ashtavakra Gita. And hence the decision to do the Ashtavakra Gita, and Hindol and I got together to do this.
Okay. The Ashtavakra Gita is supposed to be a conversation, like the iconic conversations that Krishna is doing. So this is supposed to be a conversation. There's a sage, Ashtavakra, and he's talking to King Janak. And through the course of the translation itself, now this is, you can look at it as a very semantical work. I'm just translating Sanskrit to English. But what was the intellectual addition? What did you discover just doing the translation?
It's a bit difficult to answer that because it's not as if I have not read the Ashtavakra Gita before the translation.
Yes.
The Ashtavakra Gita is a very direct Gita. It's a very direct Gita in the sense that the Bhagavad Gita talks about Gyan Yog, talks about Bhakti Yog, talks about Karma Yog, and it is one which is a bit like Mr. Gulati asking me questions. Now what I mean by that is when Mr. Gulati is asking me questions, I don't have control over the flow of the conversation, as opposed to a situation where I'm delivering a lecture of 30 minutes. So the Bhagavad Gita between Arjuna and Sri Krishna is a bit like that, because Arjuna is asking the questions and Sri Krishna is answering. So at the end of it, you might think, what exactly has the Bhagavad Gita taught me? Unlike that, the Ashtavakra Gita is very, very direct. It is undistilled Vedanta. It is undistilled Advaita Vedanta. One might think that here also you have in some sense, a student and a teacher. King Janaka as a student and Ashtavakra as a teacher, but it's not quite that. They're equals. So it's more like a dialogue.
A dialogue that is taking place, which is meant or has been recorded and is now being translated as a lesson. So that not only can we learn from our mistakes, but we can learn from the mistakes of others as well as the wisdom of others. So what is the wisdom then to be gleaned through a reading of these works in a more familiar language?
Particularly the Ashtavakra Gita?
Yes.
Particularly the Ashtavakra Gita, there is none. Because the simple message of the Ashtavakra Gita is ask yourself, who are you? And when you ask, who are you? Many of the things that bother you will sort of just vanish, they will disappear. The Ashtavakra Gita starts with a question by King Janaka to Ashtavakra. Kathang jnanam avapnoti, kathang mukti bhavishyati, vairagyam cha kathang praptang, etad bruhi mama prabho. O Lord, tell me, how do I get jnana, as in knowledge? How do I get mukti, as in liberation from samsara? How do I get vairagya, as in the sense of non-detachment? In the course of the discussion, it boils down to asking, what is Gyan? Who is seeking the Gyan? Who am I? Who is seeking mukti? Who is samsara? What is samsara? Vairagya? What am I attached to? So it completely demolishes the way we look at things. Normally we look at things in terms of relationships with the external world. It completely demolishes that perspective and says something that has been an integral part of our Vedanta, of our Upanishads, which is look inwards. So the Ashtavakra Gita is deceptively simple to understand. It is extremely, extremely difficult to practice in real life. I'm inclined to think very few people would be able to do what King Janaka did.
You know, ladies and gentlemen, this is exactly, in fact, before we started this interview, this is exactly the same that thought was playing through my head, is self-identity. Who are you? A very simple question to ask. We ask it when we are, little children in school and we're writing the articles on myself, and a life journey passes you by and the constant pursuit for that answer. Hindol, then let me bring you in. What was your conversation with Professor Debroy in saying that, okay, he's going to do a translation, but we are going to add perspective to that translation? Is it indicative of a personal experience of reading the translation and your own personal self journey? And what does that indicate to somebody who's going to be reading this book?
Before I come to that, Rishabh, I want to add to something Bibek just said. You know, after finishing this book, I was thinking about the idea of freedom, right? And you and I have spent many days on your shows discussing what is national identity and how do nations or civilizations look at things.
Yes.
Now, nations and civilizations often have ideas about freedom. If you look at the American idea of freedom in the Bill of Rights, it's very clear. There is the freedom of speech. There is the economic freedom that is embedded in it. There is a freedom of circumstance. You can decide whatever the life circumstance you want. But if you think about it, Rishabh, all of those, if I were to compare the American idea with ours, they are based on a material idea of being. Your freedom is a material freedom. I think Ashtavakra Gita, which by the way, Sri Ramakrishna asked Swami Vivekananda, Narendranath Datta, Swami Vivekananda to read as one of the foundational pillars of him becoming Swami Vivekananda in a sense. The Ashtavakra Gita is a wonderful text that urges us to see freedom beyond the material circumstance. As Bibek was saying, you look beyond all the sort of, sansar and every other desire that you have within the material world, you look beyond that. That sense of urging towards freedom is a very fundamental, at least to me, a very fundamental pillar of the way we think about, we in India think about freedom, how Bharat thinks about freedom. Now, I read this book when my father was very, very unwell. I write about this in detail in the book. And I realized, as Bibek was saying, it's very difficult to actually practice this. I mean, how many of us are ready to practice the lessons of the Ashtavakra Gita? But it is still very important to know that these lessons exist and that they are urging us towards a particular direction, even if most of us will perhaps never reach the
But that is going to be exactly my next question to you, because we are in a day and age when we have the questions of self-definition, the questions of who we are, where we come from, where we're going. They all seem strangely unanswered. The history that we were taught and taken for granted, passed over all these things in favor for a westernized history. And there's so many conversations we've had. But we are also a generation dealing with existential questions, with stress, with problems of how do we tackle mental health. And there is a spiritual journey that is right there, that is asking you to remove yourself from your present circumstances and ask the larger questions and then reapply yourself to your present circumstances, which is what Sir was mentioning. What is for people just dealing with daily life, okay, who might think that these are all intellectual pursuits for people who have the passion for it. How does the person with the daily life get affected by reading a book or just the translation of
Well, I can share on a very, very personal note. I was reading the Ashtavakra Gita at a time when I genuinely felt that my father may not live. He was that unwell. And that's very difficult. I write in the book, and I said this at a different stage on the book, in a sense, children never become adults until they see the mortality of their parents. And in India especially, I don't think sons become adults until they're faced with the mortality of their fathers. And that was a very tumultuous, difficult period for me. I think what the Ashtavakra Gita did for me personally, and I'm not saying each person will have their own journey with the book, but for me personally, what it did was it urged me to see beyond the physical self of my father and to see the love that my father had given me as a broader idea that will always remain with me. Now, this is not easy, right? And I say at the end of the book that I am very cognizant that most of us will never reach the destination that, for instance, Swami Vivekananda reached, right? We will not. But it is still important for us to at least be aware that another dimension exists. And you were talking about Bibek Da's work, holistically, not just with the Ashtavakra Gita. I think there is a deep need, and you and I have discussed this in the past. There is a deep need, and there was a deep need which his work is fulfilling, of contemporary Indians trying to understand our eternal knowledge through the means of a certain language that we are familiar with, easy to understand English, but scholarly, not dumbed down.
Exactly.
That is the difference.
Exactly.
So that is, really important, because what we do with this book also is to help people or try and understand. See, sometimes when you just have the Ashtavakra Gita, right?
Yeah.
It's very difficult for people to understand, how do I apply this to my life? Okay,
Exactly.
So fine, he said all these things.
It's an intellectual work. You do it, do it for intellectual stimulation, but that's it.
And when I wrote the book on Vivekananda, people asked me that, I really liked your book, but I never go and read Vivekananda because, I read him and I think, okay, so he said these great things, he was a sage. What do I do with this, right?
So exactly this, so my grandfather was a follower of Ramakrishna, and I have a library at home full of shelves of the works of Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda and his journeys. And as a child, I would read these things merely to be an eccentric. Because if you walked in with a book of Swami Vivekananda and everybody else reading Harry Potter, then you're going, oh, what are you doing? And then you realize that looking back, it was an incidental introduction of just picking out a book. So Bibek Debroy, ladies and gentlemen, they talk about the philosopher king. But in a present context, how do you be a person who is gaining from intellectual pursuit, which for some people would be their entire life's work, but also have a life's work. And that is an inspiration to people like me, because when you think and you're dealing with stress and you're thinking with larger questions in just day-to-day life, Professor Debroy, how does one learn from the wisdom of the past and apply it to the present?
I'm going to give you a very unsatisfactory answer, an unsatisfactory sounding answer, but I think that is the right answer. We are at different levels of development up that Adhyata ladder. It is futile to try and pretend that all of us are at the same level up that ladder. We are carrying forward the sanskars of our earlier lives. There is the earlier karma. The objective of human existence is to try and go up that ladder as much as is possible, subject to the constraint that I mentioned. You used the word stress earlier. Stress from what? Most of the time when we are talking about stress, we are talking about stress from external objects, external people. Bosses, subordinates, spouses, grandparents, parents, children, grandchildren. The inherent message of all of our texts is these are all temporary, these are transient. Like peeling away an onion, when you peel away these layers, then you begin to ask, who are you? And one of the lessons is, I am not this body. The Ashtavakra Gita says, and this is very difficult to do, Yadi dehang prithakritya chiti visramma tishtasi adhunaiva sukhi shanta bandhamukta bhavishyasi. If you separate yourself from the body and the physical pleasure and pain as attachment associated with the body, and rest yourself in your consciousness, which you have to discover within yourself, then right now, even today, you will be happy, you will be serene, you will be free from bondage. There is a celebrated sloka from the Ashtavakra Gita, which I will not quote. Essentially, it says that if you think you are bound, you will be bound. If you think you are free, you will be free. Whatever is your inclination, that determines your destination. So essentially, it is within us.
You know, it all sounds, and I can't explain to you unless you actually read this book, how accessible it is making these kind of thoughts. Because the reason the reason I related to stress, because that's something we can all understand, right? We all get stressed out. But within that, finding this, who are you? So let me put in a very personal context. Here I am in a privileged position of being an editor of a news channel, a next generation editor. What are the problems? Am I going with the flow of how the media should be functioning as it always has and say, this is what I was taught, I'm simply going through it and dealing with the pressures and the stresses that come with it? Or who am I? And therefore, what should I do with this opportunity for however limited a period of time I might come to enjoy it? I know it's not going to be infinitely long. And it's when you ask yourself this question, things start changing. I don't want to shout and scream at people. What's that achieving? What are we contributing? How are we contributing to our country? Why do we always raise problems and never find any solutions? What is our microphone and platform for? And if you think this, and now I tell a younger generation of journalists, you have to keep thinking what you're doing, not just mindlessly keep doing it. So, Hindol, let me come back to a conversation because we've had it for several hours over course of several months before. In our definition of who we are as an individual, how does then that translate into country, humanity?
In my opinion, if we are able to, Bibek Debroy was just talking about a journey, right? What does that journey imply? If you are free, if you think you're free. Now, will you ever reach that point where you will truly realize what freedom is and become free? Perhaps yes, perhaps no, we don't know, right? Most people perhaps know. But if you come closer and closer, right? I'll give you a very prosaic example, right? One of the things I began to practice only recently, is that I will buy less. Because I think attachment, the idea of attachment, the Ashtavakra Gita is asking us to be free from all attachment. Our fundamental attachment begins from consumption. In the world that we live in, consumption is the baseline of our attachment. Then comes deeper attachment to our desires, to our family, to people, to all kinds of things, right? But consumption is the baseline from where our attachment begins. And we live in a city where consumption defines our status. We live in Delhi, where consumption is such an important part of where our status is in the hierarchy of the city. But can we build in any way a more contemplative life where at least mindfully we detach? And perhaps that is freedom.
No, because this is why I find this, I don't want to call it eccentric, because I remember reading about this book which Bibek Debroy incidentally authored. And I'm thinking, here is a person who is the highest level of economic policy in the country. And why is he having a fascination for the construction of a pen? It's that Sherlock Holmesian kind of logic. And then that makes you think, why not? If I want to do something or have an interest in something, what is stopping me from pursuing it? But within this, Hindol, and before I put the question to Bibek, so we are telling the country that, of course, the economy is going to be based on consumption.
Yes.
It's going to be based on material wants. You want your house, okay? You want a better life, okay? You want a better road. A country that is emerging is going to be a developed country, and the developed country and the Viksit status is based on per capita income and how much you earn. But at the same time, we're looking for intellectual stimulus, which perhaps we had, and we can well argue that our consumption is going to corrupt.
But it's what kind of consumption, isn't it? Look at the consumption. I mean, this is the best time to discuss this. We had one of the worst summers ever in Delhi, at least in living memory.
Yeah.
You and I have spent a lifetime here. This summer was terrible. And we are still building buildings which only have a glass facade. We're still buying cars which only will do damage to the environment. Now, it's about what kind of consumption. Also, and Bibekda will answer this better, you may have an interest, like you're saying he has an interest in pens. But how attached is he to that interest is a question to ask. Because, a lot of the Ramakrishna Mission monks, for instance, I have met in Europe, it's not like they're not interested. They will also buy something nice and may use it, but it doesn't define their identity. It's not like in Delhi that the size of your car defines who you are and the size of your house defines who you are. It's, you may consume it, you may use it, you may enjoy it also in that moment, but you are not, that doesn't become your identity. And Rishabh, actually, let me say this, because you're in television, it's worth, and I used to be in television. How attached are you? How attached is your identity today to the fact that you're editor of NewsX?
Yeah, it's a fundamental question.
Many people cannot leave TV.
No, I ask myself that question.
Because it's become fused.
I ask myself that question, that the lights and cameras are on, and I see other editors making that mistake, and this is going to air, that you think this is forever, and therefore you keep expounding forever. But one day the lights and camera go back, and then you have to live with yourself. And I'm asking myself that question 30 years from now, when I have to live with myself, when the lights and cameras disappear, how will I look back at my life?
Because not just 30 years from now, Rishabh, even today, say one day you woke up and said, I don't feel like doing this anymore.
Yes.
I know editors who, slightly more senior than me, who have never been able to leave, and not just editors, not just this job.
Yes.
Many people cannot leave their jobs because their identity has become that job.
So this is, it is a conundrum, and the powerful thing about books, this one and like this one, is it's very emotional, and it should not be, because you're expecting to read what is in effect a literal translation, and you're expecting to just walk away with a sort of pseudo-intellectualism. Then tomorrow I can quote some shlokas and I can say I read Bibek Debroy's book, so I feel uplifted, but I have not really done something. But what Bibek Debroy is actually telling you is it's not about learning the shlokas, it's about getting you to think a little bit. And it was very powerfully, I was thinking about this late last night. So I wanted to ask you this question, and it's an obviously complex question. How does a person involved with the pragmatic issues of economic policy, which is very real about if you do this, then this happens, if you do this, this happens, then apply thought, which is at a larger level, onto daily decisions?
I think Hindol, in the context of the Ashtavakra Gita, obviously,
Yes.
I think Hindol has partly answered the question. Let me relate an anecdote to you. Some years ago, I went to a hotel in Jaipur. I've stayed several times at this hotel in Jaipur. So as soon as I walked in at the reception, they recognized me. The lady said, "Mr. Debroy, welcome back." And she said, "Can I have your credit card?" I said, "For what? You know who I am." She said, "No, but I still need your credit card. I need your Aadhaar card." We have reduced ourselves to these labels, to pieces of plastic. Aadhaar card, credit card, identity card, editor of a major news channel, these are all labels. At the end of it, the question to ask is this what Mr. Gulati is? Or is there more to Mr. Gulati? Because these things will come and go. As I said earlier, you also echoed that these are transient. Beyond all of these temporary things, is there some permanent entity that is Rishabh Gulati? That's the question all of Vedanta seeks to answer. Sannyas. We tend to think of sannyas as renouncing everything, going off to the Himalayas. Sannyas is satnyas, to base yourself on the virtuous path. I can be on the virtuous path even while I am a householder. Why on earth do I have to go off to the Himalayas? For instance, if I am going to do pranayam, it is easier to do pranayam at low altitudes than high altitudes. But that's beside the point. The critical point is this, that how attached am I to these possessions, the car that Hindol mentioned. Tomorrow if this car goes away, I'm not renouncing the car, but tomorrow if this car goes away, does it affect me? There is a celebrated story about a king and a sadhu. The king goes and tells the sadhu that let's trade places for some time. You become the king for 6 months, I'll go and become a sadhu for 6 months. After 6 months, the king comes and finds that the sadhu is enjoying all the trappings of royalty. And he says, what's the difference between you and me? The sadhu says, the difference between you and me is I'm just giving this up and going off. You won't be able to do it. So it's really a state of the mind.
But Hindol, this is then paradoxical in many ways, right? Because especially when you're dealing with people who are looking to evolve their thought process, and you know the impact that thought process is going to have to the future of the country and to themselves. You want them to be passionate about a cause. You want them to be emotional about something. You want them to really care about the work. As we were entering, the table had not been cleaned properly, and you're thinking, even in household chores, think about that person who is not because they are being told every day, but because they want cleanliness, and in simple things are doing it. So you want people committed and passionate, but we're also trying to say that you need to disassociate yourselves. How do you deal with that as an individual?
If I may, Rishabh, I actually have a contrarian opinion to this. I think the most detached people perhaps do the best quality work because their ego is not in that work. They are looking at the work purely as something that I have to do to the best of my ability in that moment. They are not projecting by saying, like for instance, today me as an author, then I'm not projecting by saying, okay, now I will write 5 more books, then I'll win an award, then I will be here, then I will be there, then some government body will put me somewhere. All of that is not there. I am focused on the words I'm putting on that page in that moment. When it's done, I am done. And that's it.
But is it then to be translated that this is, lack of ambition? You slow down, or do you speed up?
But it all depends on how you define ambition. If I define ambition as genuinely me feeling a sense of contentment and happiness every day, then my own ego is preventing that at every moment. The more I project inwards and externally, the more I feel that, okay, I have to show this person this, I have to show that person that, the more misery I'm bringing upon myself. Like in Zen, they say, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. You're still doing your task to the best of your ability. You're just not projecting your ego upon it.
Okay, we're short of time, but Bibek, I needed to ask you this question. Because a lot of us, and for a large part of my life as well, it's much easier just to be told what to do. That this is what you should be doing, and having done it, that this is what you should study, this is what you need to answer to get your marks, and then you get to do this degree, and then once you do this degree, you get your job, then you follow what your boss does. If you follow really well what your boss does, and then that's how you go up, and you don't really need to think for yourself. So the very difficult answers that Bibek Debroy is just giving you, that I don't have any answers for you. So all of us want to read self-help books of somebody who is telling you, trying to motivate you that yes, you can do this and you can achieve great things. But we want a recipe, we want a formula. And when people like you tell us that, listen, there is no recipe or no formula, how does that, what are we telling the people of what journey they need to be taking?
Actually, there is no recipe because the answer is inside. But in addition, there are self-help books. The Ashtavakra Gita is not one of those. The Ashtavakra Gita is like a text where it is as if King Janaka and Ashtavakra were having a conversation and some external observer just recorded the entire conversation. This is not in the nature of a text where someone is teaching someone something, and therefore I have an Ashtavakra Gita for dummies. The nature of this text is not that.
Yes, correct.
The Bhagavad Gita is amenable to lessons. Ashtavakra Gita isn't readily amenable to lessons. A reader recently told me something which I think is very perceptive. He said, you've done a very beautiful translation of the Ashtavakra Gita. But to me, it came alive because of Hindol's personal reflections. Then I could relate. So my recommendation to everyone, this is within quotes, is that they should first read the Hindol part and then read your translation.
Interesting thought.
Now, this is a reaction from someone who reads a lot, but I thought this was a very interesting way of looking at it.
Very interesting thought. Come to think of it, going through the book, yes, that would apply. So Hindol, let's get through the practicalities of it, okay? Because, ladies and gentlemen, I was thinking last night, this is the reason I do this job. Because I get a phone call from Hindol, who I've known for a long period of time. Bibek Debroy, no introduction required. So the reason many people would probably think of buying the book is, Bibek Debroy has done the introduction, and Hindol Sengupta is writing his thoughts on it. And that often becomes, this author has done it, so this film director, this film star, so it must be good. So your first reflection becomes that. That was my first reflection. Bibek Debroy, then of course, let me go through the book. And then I'm thinking, in my job, I get forced to do this because of my self-consciousness that I have read the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius before I have read this Ashtavakra Gita. And I am aware of his existence, but because of the nature of this job, I have been at some point forced to go through it, because I don't want to meet Bibek Debroy in the morning and saying, sir, what is Ashtavakra Gita, sir? Okay, so I want to come across as intelligent. I want to have read the book. So my motivations are, very material, okay? It's part of my job. But an hour later, somebody will then force me to worry about the cryogenic engine of ISRO, and then I will be forced to study that, and it opens up enlightenment. But on practicalities, the book is now being published, it's out there. I'm assuming it's now easily available in those.
It is available everywhere. On Amazon and all platforms, on Parhega India, the other big platform, on major bookstores and so on and so forth. So everybody can buy it. Just if I can take 5 seconds.
Please.
Because of something you said, Rishabh, it just triggered me out. I want to ask him, Bibek Debroy is today the only man living who managed to translate the Mahabharata and the Ramayana and has gone on to the Puranas, right? No one else has ever done this. No person living has done this. But when you began, did you think that I am aiming to become the only person in my lifetime who will finish this?
No. There were a series of coincidences, accidents, which seemed to guide me along this path. So, as I said earlier, I think I casually remarked earlier, it was never a conscious decision.
And yet he's done it at a level higher than most other people, right? And to that, this is the answer to, I was thinking to your question, right? He never set out to become the only living person ever to be doing this. It happened because he was in that moment translating that one shlok after another, and that moment continued and became what it became.
Yeah, it's genuinely fascinating. Ladies and gentlemen, I only had 2-3 days, okay, since I spoke to Hindol and we've organized this interview. And like I said, my profession pulls you in multiple directions. And this is such a powerful book, okay, because it is doing all the things that Bibek Debroy just said. It's not telling me what to do, that this is what you should do and this is the formula and apply the formula. It's actually telling me through the conversation that, Rishabh, you don't know who you are and you don't really know what you're doing, even though you might think that, oh, I'm very good at my job and I'm very successful, and look at the the badge I'm wearing, and obviously other people think I'm successful, and it becomes so powerful. I literally could sleep all night thinking about these thoughts. And I know this is a multi-hour conversation that we can have. Maybe we need to have it, and maybe the mass medium, which all of us have the privilege of having microphones attached to ourselves, and there are influencers out there who also have microphones, can think that this is a legacy. He who saves one life saves the world entire. Bibek Debroy, thank you for a fascinating life, which is distilled in a very clinical translation, and then that's all Bibek Debroy is offering you. He's offering you a very clinical translation, and Hindol Sengupta is offering you perspective, and I think it makes a lot of eminent sense to read Hindol's thoughts on this before you read the translation. So please, let's get the book. Hopefully it will be as moving an experience for you as it was for me. Bibek ji, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rishabh. Thank you.